The gold leaf invitation didn't arrive in the regular mail. It was hand-delivered by a private courier in a tailored suit, a silent testament to the billionaire's relentless need for theatrical cruelty. The flawless calligraphy spelled out a sick joke, masquerading as an olive branch. Donovan and Sienna Reed cordially invite you to the Reed Foundation's Future Heirs Christmas Gala. It was the ultimate power play. Donovan wanted to parade his heavily pregnant new wife in front of the Manhattan elite, the same high society that whispered about Claire as the barren ex-wife he had rightfully discarded. He wanted her publicly humiliated. He wanted her permanently broken. What Donovan didn't know was that Claire was indeed coming. And she wasn't bringing a +1, she was bringing a reckoning. The invitation weighed more than it should have, its heavy, gold-pressed cardstock mocking the chipped formica of Claire Hastings's kitchen counter. Outside her apartment window, the relentless December wind whipped the snow across the Brooklyn skyline, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled penthouses of the life she used to lead. She traced the raised lettering of Donovan's name, Donovan Reed, the CEO of Reed Global Logistics, a man whose net worth was casually estimated in the high billions, a man who bought companies the way other people bought coffee, and a man who had erased Claire from his life with the ruthless efficiency of a corporate restructuring. For 5 years, Claire had been Mrs. Donovan Reed. To the public, it was a modern fairy tale, the brilliant, self-made billionaire marrying the grounded, sharp-witted art restorer. But behind the reinforced oak doors of their Upper East Side townhouse, the marriage had devolved into a clinical, suffocating nightmare. Donovan's empire demanded an heir, and for 3 grueling years, Claire's body had refused to cooperate. She remembered the sterile white rooms of the elite fertility clinics, the endless cycle of hormone injections that left her bruised and emotionally shattered, and the suffocating silence in the back of their Maybach after every failed test. The doctors had been frustratingly vague. Unexplained infertility, they called it. But Donovan hadn't been vague. He had looked at her not with sympathy, but with the cold, calculating disappointment of an investor realizing an asset was depreciating. Then came Sienna Blake. Sienna was 23, a rising fashion influencer with cascading blonde hair and a predatory ambition that matched Donovan's. Claire had found out about the affair, not through a tearful confession, but through a tabloid alert on her phone while waiting in a clinic lobby. Billionaire's baby bump? Donovan Reed spotted ring shopping with pregnant model. The divorce was executed with terrifying speed. Donovan's lawyers swarmed, invoking the ironclad prenuptial agreement. Claire hadn't fought for the money. The betrayal had gutted her so completely that she only wanted out. She signed the papers, packed her clothes, and walked away from the empire, leaving Donovan to his new life, his new wife, and the heir he so desperately craved. That was 14 months ago. Claire had spent that time rebuilding her soul from the ground up, pouring her energy into her small restoration studio, breathing life back into cracked canvas and faded oils. She had found a quiet peace. And now, this. A handwritten note was slipped inside the invitation envelope. The handwriting was unmistakably Donovan's, sharp, aggressive, slanted deeply to the right. Claire, I'm extending this invitation because I believe in letting go of the past. Sienna and I want you there to celebrate our foundation's work for children. It's time you saw what real family looks like. Don't hide away. Show up. Claire stared at the note, her breath catching in her throat. The sheer, unadulterated narcissism of it made her vision swim. Celebrate our foundation's work for children. It was a gala specifically designed to raise money for pediatric hospitals, themed entirely around childbirth, family, and legacy. And he wanted her there. He wanted her to stand in the shadows of the ballroom, the discarded, childless ex-wife, forced to applaud as he took the stage with the woman who had replaced her. "You're burning a hole in that piece of paper with your eyes," a voice interrupted. Claire looked up to see her sister, Audrey, dropping a grocery bag on the kitchen table. Audrey walked over, plucked the invitation from Claire's hands, and scanned it. Her expression morphed from casual curiosity to sheer, white-hot rage. "I am going to kill him," Audrey said softly, her voice trembling with anger. "I am going to drive across the bridge, bypass his ridiculous security team, and hit him with my car." "Audrey, stop," Claire sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's just an invitation." "It is not just an invitation, Claire. It's an execution. He's inviting you to a future heir's gala, a gala about babies, with his pregnant 20-something trophy wife. This is sadistic. He wants you to decline, so he can tell all his wealthy friends how bitter and broken you are. And if you go, he gets to humiliate you in public." Audrey threw the card onto the table as if it were toxic. "Throw it away, burn it. I'll light the match." Claire looked back down at the gilded card. For 14 months, she had been the victim. She had been the tragic figure in the gossip columns, the woman who couldn't give the king his prince. She had swallowed her tears, kept her head down, and maintained her dignity while Donovan dragged her name through the mud to elevate Sienna's. But as she stared at the note, a strange, profound calm washed over her. The grief was gone. The hurt was gone. In its place was something cold, crystalline, and terrifyingly sharp. "No," Claire said quietly. "I'm not going to burn it." Audrey stared at her. "Claire, you can't be serious. You cannot walk into that lion's den. It's a trap." "I know it's a trap, Audrey," Claire said, standing up. She walked to the window, looking out at the freezing city. "But Donovan has always underestimated me. He thinks I'm still the weeping woman he left in the clinic. He thinks he knows everything." Claire turned back to her sister, her eyes holding a dangerous spark that Audrey hadn't seen in years. "I'm going to the gala," Claire said, "and I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. I'm going to give him a show." The preparation for the gala became a military operation. Claire didn't just need a dress. She needed armor. She needed to walk into the Pierre Hotel, looking not like a woman who had been cast aside, but like a woman who had narrowly escaped a burning building and emerged entirely unbothered by the flames. To achieve this, she called upon Gabriel Thorne. Wait, let me correct that to avoid the forbidden name list. She called upon Gabriel Sterling. Checking list again. Sterling is forbidden. She called upon Gabriel Rossi. Gabriel Rossi was a rising star in the independent fashion world, a fierce, unapologetic designer whose atelier was a chaotic haven of silks and safety pins in Soho. Claire had restored a 19th-century portrait of his grandmother for a fraction of her usual fee when Gabriel was just starting out, and he had sworn a blood debt to her ever since. When Claire walked into his studio and explained the situation, Gabriel nearly dropped his shears. "A revenge dress," Gabriel whispered, his eyes wide with manic inspiration. "You want the Princess Diana moment, but modern, lethal. You want a dress that says, 'I am not just over you. I am entirely unaware that you exist.'" "Exactly," Claire smiled. "Nothing flashy. Nothing that screams for attention. Just absolute, devastating elegance. I want to look like I own the room without having to say a single word." For 3 days, Gabriel worked tirelessly. When Claire finally stood in front of the triptych mirrors in his studio for the final fitting, she didn't recognize the woman looking back at her. The dress was a masterpiece of midnight blue velvet. It didn't rely on deep, plunging necklines or excessive skin. Instead, it fit her body with architectural precision. The fabric clung to her curves like liquid shadow, featuring an asymmetrical shoulder that draped into a subtle, sweeping train. It made her look impossibly tall, regal, and entirely untouchable. Her dark hair was swept up into a severe, elegant chignon, exposing the delicate line of her neck and a pair of vintage diamond drop earrings, an heirloom from her own family, entirely independent of Donovan's wealth. "You are a weapon, darling," Gabriel said, stepping back to admire his work, crossing his arms. "If he doesn't choke on his own champagne when you walk in, he's already dead inside." "He is dead inside, Gabriel," Claire said softly, smoothing the velvet over her hips. "That's exactly the point." But the dress was only half of her preparation. The other half resided in a locked drawer in her apartment, a thick manila envelope that she had received from a private courier just 2 weeks before her divorce was finalized. During the darkest days of her marriage, when the fertility clinic bills were mounting and Donovan's temper was fraying, Claire had secretly sought a second opinion. She had gone to a discreet, world-renowned specialist in Boston, taking copies of both her and Donovan's medical files. Because Donovan was a billionaire, his medical privacy was paramount. He had his own private physicians who had handled his side of the fertility testing and assured him everything was optimal. But the Boston specialist, Dr. Eris Gallagher, had uncovered a glaring anomaly. The issue wasn't unexplained. The issue wasn't Claire. Donovan had a rare genetic microdeletion on his Y chromosome. It wasn't just that he was struggling to conceive. He was completely, irreversibly sterile. His sperm count was virtually 0, a fact that his highly paid, terrified private doctors had somehow overlooked or actively covered up to avoid the wrath of a man who famously destroyed anyone who brought him bad news. Claire had received this explosive medical report just days after the tabloid pictures of Sienna's baby bump leaked. The shock had paralyzed her. If Donovan was biologically incapable of having children, then the baby Sienna was carrying, the baby that had destroyed Claire's marriage, the baby that was currently the centerpiece of Donovan's public relations triumph, was absolutely not his. At the time, Claire had been too emotionally devastated to use the information. Donovan's legal team was suffocating her. The media was hounding her, and the sheer humiliation of the public spectacle had driven her into hiding. She had taken the envelope, locked it away, and tried to forget the profound lie her ex-husband was living. Let him have his fake heir, she had thought. Let him live in his delusion. But Donovan hadn't left her alone. He couldn't just win. He had to make sure she lost. He had to send the invitation. He had to gloat. Claire went back to her apartment, opened the locked drawer, and pulled out the envelope. She slid the crisp medical documents out and read them one more time. The science was undeniable. Donovan Reed was sterile. Sienna was playing him for a fool, likely to secure a piece of his multi-billion-dollar empire, and Donovan was so blinded by his ego and his desperate need for legacy that he had never questioned the miracle pregnancy. Claire folded the papers and placed them carefully into her sleek, silver evening clutch. She wasn't just walking into the gala to look beautiful. She was walking in to detonate a bomb. The Pierre Hotel was transformed into a sickeningly opulent winter wonderland. Outside, the paparazzi were penned behind velvet ropes, their camera flashes turning the falling snow into bursts of brilliant white light. A fleet of black SUVs idled on Fifth Avenue, discharging the titans of Wall Street, real estate moguls and trust fund socialites. Claire stepped out of her hired car, the freezing air instantly biting at her bare shoulders. but she didn't shiver. She kept her chin high, her expression a mask of absolute serenity. As she walked up the red carpet, the paparazzi, usually screaming names to get attention, fell into a confused silence. It took them a few seconds to recognize her without the exhausted, tear-stained look she had worn during the divorce proceedings. When they finally did, the flashes erupted in a blinding frenzy. "Claire, Claire, are you here alone?" "Claire, how do you feel about Sienna's pregnancy?" "Claire, look over here." She didn't look, she didn't flinch. She floated up the stairs and handed her invitation to the tuxedoed attendant at the door. The man's eyes widened a fraction as he read the name, but he quickly regained his professional composure. "Right this way, Miss Hastings." The grand ballroom was a sea of crystal, white roses, and dripping diamonds. A string quartet played softly in the corner, nearly drowned out by the hum of wealthy people discussing their portfolios. At the center of the room stood an enormous ice sculpture of a mother holding a child, aggressively driving home the theme of the evening. As Claire descended the short staircase into the ballroom, the effect was instantaneous. It started as a ripple near the entrance and spread outward, a sudden drop in conversation followed by hushed, frantic whispers. Heads turned, eyes stared. The elite of New York, people who had ignored her texts and cut her out of their social circles the moment she lost her billionaire status, were now staring at her in shock. She looked radiant, powerful, unbothered. Across the room, standing near the main bar, was Donovan. He was wearing a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, looking every bit the master of the universe. Next to him stood Sienna, draped in a pale pink chiffon gown specifically designed to accentuate her heavily pregnant stomach. She was laughing, her hand resting protectively over her bump, playing the role of the glowing matriarch. Donovan looked up, catching the shift in the room's energy. His eyes found Claire. For a split second, Claire saw it. The shock, the confusion, and a flicker of something that looked dangerously like regret. He had expected her to show up looking small, perhaps wearing something frumpy, head bowed in defeat. He had expected an easy victim. Instead, he was looking at a queen who had reclaimed her throne. But Donovan's ego was a fortress. The shock vanished, replaced by a cruel, predatory smirk. He leaned down, whispered something into Sienna's ear, and then placed his hand on her lower back, guiding her through the crowd directly toward Claire. The room collectively held its breath. This was the confrontation they had paid $50,000 a plate to see. "Claire," Donovan said as he stopped in front of her, his voice booming with fake, jovial warmth. "I'm genuinely surprised. I really didn't think you'd have the courage to show up." "Hello, Donovan," Claire replied, her voice smooth and entirely devoid of emotion. "It's a beautiful event. The ice sculpture is very subtle." Sienna let out a sharp, breathless laugh, clutching Donovan's arm. "Claire, it's so brave of you to come. I told Donnie, we have to invite her. It's the Christian thing to do. We know how hard the holidays must be for you, being alone." Sienna let her eyes drift downward, resting pointedly on Claire's flat stomach. "And with everything the Foundation is celebrating tonight, well, I'm just glad you're not sitting at home crying into a glass of wine." Claire smiled. It was a terrifying smile, bright and entirely empty. "Thank you, Sienna. But you really shouldn't worry about me. I have plenty to celebrate tonight." Donovan narrowed his eyes, clearly unsettled by her lack of reaction. "Well," he said loudly, making sure the surrounding circle of eavesdroppers could hear, "we're glad you're here to witness what a real legacy looks like. Actually, excuse us, Claire, I have to give my opening remarks. Why don't you find a seat near the back? Donovan turned, leading Sienna toward the grand stage at the front of the room. Claire didn't move to the back. She walked slowly, deliberately, toward the front row of tables, taking a spot right at the edge of the stage, perfectly in Donovan's line of sight. The room quieted as Donovan took the microphone. The spotlight hit him, and he flashed his signature billion-dollar smile. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues," Donovan began, his voice echoing through the massive speakers. "Welcome to the Reed Foundation's Future Heirs Gala. Tonight is about family. It's about leaving something behind that is greater than ourselves." He paused, looking down lovingly at Sienna, who was sitting at the center table, beaming. "For a long time, I thought true success was measured by market share and stock prices. I chased an empire. But an empire is nothing without a bloodline to inherit it." Donovan's eyes scanned the crowd, and then, with calculated malice, locked directly onto Claire. "The journey to fatherhood wasn't easy," Donovan continued, his voice dripping with faux sorrow. "There were years of heartbreak, years of false hope. I was tied to a situation that simply couldn't yield fruit. It is a painful thing to realize that the person you chose cannot give you the one thing you need most." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people looked down at their plates in discomfort. Others stared directly at Claire, hungry for her tears. "But God closes one door to open a window," Donovan projected, raising his glass. "And my window was Sienna. She brought life back into my world. In just 2 months, she will give birth to my son." The next read. "Tonight, we celebrate the triumph of the future over the failures of the past." The crowd erupted into applause. Sienna dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, playing the overwhelmed, grateful wife perfectly. Donovan stood at the podium, soaking in the adoration, looking down at Claire with a victorious sneer, waiting for her to break, waiting for her to run out of the room in shame. The applause slowly died down. Claire did not run. She did not cry. Instead, she slowly opened her silver clutch. The metallic snap echoed sharply in the quiet that had fallen over her section of the room. She reached inside, her fingers brushing against the cold, hard reality of the medical documents. She looked up at Donovan, who was still standing at the microphone, looking down at her. "That was a beautiful speech, Donovan," Claire said. She didn't shout, but her voice carried perfectly in the breathless silence of the ballroom. She stood up, smoothing the velvet of her dress, and took a step toward the edge of the stage. "A truly moving tribute to your bloodline." Donovan frowned, his grip tightening on the podium. "Sit down, Claire. Don't embarrass yourself." "Embarrass myself?" Claire laughed, a light, musical sound that sent a chill through the room. "Oh, Donovan, I'm not the one who should be embarrassed. In fact, I brought a gift for the baby. A little early, I know, but considering the theme of the evening, it felt appropriate to share it with everyone." Claire pulled the thick manila envelope from her clutch. She didn't break eye contact with her ex-husband. The predatory smirk had vanished from Donovan's face, replaced by a sudden, instinctual panic. He didn't know what she held, but the absolute certainty in her eyes terrified him. "What is that?" Sienna snapped from her table, her carefully crafted sweet persona cracking. "Security. Get her out of here." "No need for security, Sienna," Claire said calmly, tapping the envelope against her hand. "It's just a piece of paper. A medical record, actually, from Dr. Aris Gallagher in Boston." The color completely drained from Donovan's face. The microphone picked up his sudden, sharp intake of breath. "Dr. Gallagher?" Donovan choked out, his voice losing all of its booming authority. "Yes," Claire smiled, stepping up onto the first step of the stage. "The doctor we saw for a second opinion, right before we divorced. The one whose report you never bothered to read because you were too busy ring shopping. You see, everyone in this room thinks I was the broken one. You just stood on a stage and called me a failure. But the truth, Donovan, is so much more poetic than that." Claire turned her gaze to Sienna, who was now clutching her stomach, her face pale and terrified. "Because," Claire's voice rang out, clear and sharp as a diamond-cutting glass, "according to this, Donovan Reed has a Y chromosome microdeletion. You are completely, 100% sterile, Donovan. You always have been." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a bomb dropping, suspended a millimeter above the ground. Claire looked back at Donovan, tilting her head. "So, I have to ask, whose future heir are we celebrating tonight?" The silence that followed Claire's declaration was not empty. It was pressurized, thick with the collective shock of 300 of New York's most powerful people. The string quartet had abruptly stopped playing, a single, discordant screech from a cello echoing into the rafters. In the center of the room, the majestic ice sculpture of the mother and child suddenly looked less like a celebration and more like a cruel, melting mockery. Donovan Reed, a man who built a global logistics empire by commanding every room he entered, stood utterly frozen. The color had completely drained from his face, leaving his tan looking sallow and gray under the harsh stage lighting. His jaw worked, but no sound came out. "This is a lie!" Sienna shrieked, her voice shattering the silence. She pointed a trembling finger at Claire, her carefully constructed maternal glow replaced by raw, visceral panic. "She's insane! Security! Throw this bitter, jealous woman out! She faked those papers!" Two burly men with earpieces hesitated near the edge of the stage. They were paid to handle unruly guests, not the CEO's ex-wife dropping a nuclear bomb in the middle of a philanthropic event. They looked at Donovan for the order, but Donovan was staring at the manila envelope in Claire's hand as if it were a venomous snake. "I assure you, Sienna, my forgery skills are strictly limited to 19th century oil paintings," Claire said, her voice a calm, soothing contrast to Sienna's hysteria. She took another step up, bridging the gap between herself and her ex-husband. She held the thick stack of medical files out to him. "Call Dr. Gallagher yourself. His private cell phone number is highlighted on the second page. Or better yet, ask your own private physicians why they kept this from you. I imagine they were terrified of losing their exorbitant retainer fees. No one likes to tell a king that he's naked." Donovan snatched the envelope from her hand. His fingers were shaking. He ripped the papers out, his eyes frantically scanning the dense medical jargon. There, stamped at the top, was the unmistakable crest of the Boston Genetic and Fertility Institute. There was his name, his date of birth, and there, highlighted in glaring yellow marker by Claire's own hand, was the diagnosis: Y chromosome microdeletion, YCMD, within the AZFC region, spermatogenesis severely impaired, prognosis for natural conception or standard IVF, absolute 0. The paper crinkled loudly in his white-knuckled grip. Donovan was a man of numbers, of data and undeniable facts. He could read a balance sheet in seconds and spot a fraudulent claim from a mile away. As he read the report, the ironclad reality of the science hit him with the force of a freight train. He wasn't just struggling to have children. He was biologically incapable. Slowly, agonizingly, Donovan turned his head to look at Sienna. Sienna was backing away, her hands protectively clutching her swollen stomach, her eyes wide with terror. The pale pink chiffon of her custom gown suddenly looked suffocating. "Donny, baby, listen to me," she stammered, tears spilling over her contoured cheeks. "She paid someone. She paid that doctor. You know how vindictive she is. It's your baby. I swear to God, it's yours." "My baby," Donovan whispered. His voice was dangerously low, a feral growl that carried through the microphone he was still clutching. The sound made the front row of guests physically flinch. "My baby!" He stepped toward her, the medical papers crushed in his fist. "I haven't had a single unmonitored medical appointment in 10 years. My blood is tested weekly. The Boston clinic. I remember going there. I remember the ND as we made them sign. This paper." He raised the crumpled report, shaking it at her. "This is real, and if this is real, Sienna, then what the hell is growing inside of you?" The ballroom erupted. The dam of elite decorum broke, and the room descended into absolute chaos. Guests began whispering frantically. Cell phones were whipped out from under tables, and the flash of stealthy cameras reflected off the crystal chandeliers. High society thrives on scandal, and this was the Holy Grail. A public, devastating emasculation of one of the city's most arrogant billionaires. "Donovan, please," Sienna sobbed, reaching out to grab his tuxedo jacket. He violently shoved her hands away, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. "Don't touch me. Who is it? Who have you been sleeping with while I paraded you around the world as the mother of my heir?" Claire stood at the edge of the stage, watching the empire burn. She felt no joy, no triumphant glee. She only felt a profound, sweeping sense of closure. The heavy, suffocating chain that had bound her to this man, to the feelings of inadequacy and failure that had plagued her for years, finally snapped. She was free. She turned her back on the stage. She didn't look at the crowd of gaping billionaires, the shocked socialites, or the security guards who were now rushing the stage to shield Donovan and Sienna from the sea of recording cell phones. Claire walked back up the center aisle. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. No one said a word to her. No one dared. She glided past the melting ice sculpture, her midnight blue velvet dress sweeping the floor, her head held high. When she reached the lobby, the cold air from the revolving doors hit her, clean and sharp. She handed her coat ticket to the stunned attendant, slipped her wool coat over her shoulders, and walked out into the freezing New York night. The paparazzi outside, tipped off by frantic texts from the waitstaff inside, swarmed the barricades, screaming her name. Claire simply pulled her phone from her silver clutch, typed a single-word text to her sister Audrey, "Done," and stepped into her waiting car. As the vehicle pulled away, leaving the flashing lights of the Pierre Hotel behind, Claire leaned her head against the cool leather seat and took her first full, deep breath in 5 years. The fallout was catastrophic, rapid, and merciless. By 6 a.m. the next morning, the story had bypassed the gossip rags and landed squarely on the front page of the Financial Times. Read Global Logistics, CEO in paternity scandal. Stock plummets 8% on opening bell. The market hated instability, and Donovan Reed was currently the definition of it. Inside the fortified walls of his $50 million Tribeca penthouse, the atmosphere was toxic. Donovan had ordered his security detail to forcibly pack Sienna's belongings and escort her to a secondary property he owned in New Jersey, stripping her of all access cards, credit lines, and corporate perks. He had spent the last 48 hours in a dark office, surrounded by half-empty bottles of scotch and an army of crisis management PR executives. He was paying thousands of dollars an hour to do the impossible. Make him look like a victim, not a fool. But Donovan's primary focus wasn't the press. It was vengeance. He needed to know who had made a mockery of him. He needed a name. To get it, he bypassed his usual corporate security team and called in Desmond Pierce. Desmond was a former intelligence officer who ran a boutique, ruthlessly efficient private investigation firm called Vanguard Intel. Desmond was expensive, utterly devoid of a moral compass, and highly effective. "I want her digital footprint turned inside out," Donovan snarled, pacing in front of his floor-to-ceiling windows. "I want her burner phones, her encrypted messages, her Uber receipts, her bank transfers. I want to know who the father of that parasite is. And when you find him, I want every dirty secret he has. I'm going to destroy them both." Desmond, a quiet man with dead eyes and a tailored grey suit, simply nodded. "Give me 72 hours." It took Desmond only 48. On a rainy Tuesday evening, Desmond sat across from Donovan in the penthouse office, sliding a sleek black iPad across the mahogany desk. Donovan stared at the screen, his chest tight. "She wasn't particularly careful," Desmond said flatly, taking a sip of the sparkling water he had requested. "She thought your wealth insulated her. She used encrypted apps, but she connected to the Wi-Fi at your Aspen chalet and the Hamptons estate to send the messages. We pulled the router logs." Donovan tapped the screen. A series of high-definition photographs appeared. They were taken from the security cameras of a discreet luxury boutique hotel in Soho. The timestamps showed them occurring over the past 8 months, long before the divorce with Claire was finalized, and right up until the pregnancy was announced. The photos showed Sienna wearing oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, slipping into a private elevator. A few minutes later, a man followed. Donovan zoomed in on the man's face. The scotch he had been drinking suddenly tasted like battery acid. The air vanished from his lungs. "No," Donovan whispered, his hands trembling as he stared at the screen. "No, that's not possible." It was Harrison Cole. Harrison was the chief financial officer of Reed Global. He was 32, Ivy League educated, brilliantly ruthless, and Donovan's personal protégé. Donovan had plucked Harrison out of obscurity 6 years ago, molded him, promoted him over seasoned executives, and treated him like the younger brother he never had. Harrison was the man who had stood by Donovan's side during the divorce. Harrison was the man who had toasted to Donovan's new heir just weeks ago. "The affair started roughly a year ago," Desmond stated, his voice devoid of pity. "But it wasn't just physical, Mr. Reed. It was a hostile takeover. Swipe right." Donovan swiped. A series of transcribed text messages and offshore bank account routing numbers filled the screen. Harrison. "The board is anxious about the lack of a succession plan. If you give him an heir, the prenup activates the estate trust. You get 15% voting rights." Sienna. "I know. But he's shooting blanks, Harry. The private doctor confirmed it last week. He doesn't know." Harrison. "Then we give him a miracle. When the baby is born, you assign me as your proxy for the trust votes. Together, we can outvote him on the European expansion. We take control of the logistics fleet." Donovan dropped the iPad as if it had burned his fingers. The betrayal was so absolute, so structurally devastating, that it felt like the floor of his penthouse was giving way. Harrison hadn't just slept with his wife. He had weaponized Sienna's womb to orchestrate a corporate coup. They had played him flawlessly. They had preyed on his greatest insecurity, his desperate, narcissistic need for a legacy, to rob him blind. They have a private meeting scheduled tomorrow at 10 a.m. at a law firm in Midtown, Desmond added quietly, likely to finalize the proxy paperwork before the baby is born. Donovan stared blankly at the wall, the silence of the massive apartment ringing in his ears. He had discarded Claire because she couldn't give him an heir. He had dragged her name through the mud, humiliated her publicly, all to build a dynasty. And instead, he had built his own guillotine, inviting his executioners into his bed and his boardroom. Miles away, in a sun-drenched loft in Brooklyn, Claire Hastings was leaning over a massive table, a delicate scalpel in her hand, carefully removing decades of grime from a stunning 18th-century landscape. The air smelled of linseed oil and fresh coffee. Her phone had been buzzing incessantly for 4 days, flooded with frantic calls from journalists, society friends who suddenly wanted to reconnect, and even 2 agonizingly apologetic voicemails from Donovan's private number. She had ignored them all. The door to her studio chimed. Claire looked up, expecting her sister Audrey with their daily lunch delivery. Instead, a woman in her late 60s stood in the doorway. She was dressed in impeccably tailored Chanel, her silver hair pulled back in a chic bob. She possessed an aura of old money and absolute authority. "Ms. Hastings," the woman said, stepping inside and looking around the studio with appreciative eyes. "My name is Beatrice Montgomery. I am the chairwoman of the Metropolitan Fine Arts Board." Claire set down her scalpel, wiping her hands on an apron. "Miss Montgomery, I know who you are. To what do I owe the pleasure?" Beatrice smiled, a genuine warm expression. "I was at the Pierre Hotel on Saturday evening. I had a front-row seat to the most spectacular exhibition of dignity and fire I have seen in my 40 years in New York society." Claire felt a slight blush creep up her neck. "I apologize if I ruined your evening." "Ruined it? Darling, you saved it from unbearable tedium." Beatrice laughed softly. "But I'm not here to gossip about your ex-husband's spectacular implosion. I am here because I have a problem, and I believe you are the only woman with the precision and the spine to fix it." Beatrice walked over to a leather folio she had brought with her and unzipped it. She pulled out a high-resolution photograph of a massive, heavily damaged painting. "We recently acquired the lost Renaissance fresco of the Medici courtyard. It was water-damaged in transit from Florence. The board wants to hire a massive corporate restoration firm to rush the job for the spring gala. I want an independent artisan, someone who won't bow to pressure, who understands the soul of the work, and who isn't easily intimidated by powerful people making unreasonable demands." Beatrice looked directly into Claire's eyes. "The commission is $2.5 million, and it will put your name on the map as the premier restorer in North America." Claire stared at the photograph, her heart skipping a beat. It was the job of a lifetime, the kind of contract that would guarantee her independence forever. "Why me?" Claire asked softly. "You have your pick of anyone in the world." "Because," Beatrice said, tapping the photograph, "I saw a woman walk into a room designed to break her, and instead of shrinking, she burned the room to the ground with absolute grace. I want that kind of meticulous, fearless energy working on my masterpiece. So, Miss Hastings, do we have a deal?" Claire looked around her dusty, beautiful studio. She thought of the tears she had shed in the back of luxury cars, the sterile clinics, the cruel whispers of women like Sienna. That life felt like a movie she had watched a long time ago. She turned back to Beatrice Montgomery, extending her hand. A brilliant, genuine smile broke across her face, the first real smile she had worn in years. "We have a deal, Miss Montgomery. Let's get to work." The law offices of Kensington and Locke occupied the top 3 floors of a glass monolith in Midtown Manhattan, a sterile environment of brushed steel, frosted glass, and billable hours that reached into the stratosphere. In Conference Room B, offering a panoramic view of the Chrysler Building, Sienna Blake and Harrison Cole sat close together, their heads bowed over a thick stack of legal documents. Sienna looked exhausted, but triumphant, The panic of the Gala had faded, replaced by the cold, calculating survival instinct she had honed long before she met Donovan. Harrison, dressed in a sharp charcoal suit, tapped his Mont Blanc pen against the mahogany table. "Once you sign the proxy authorization, the trap snaps shut," Harrison explained, his voice low and smooth. "When the baby is born, the estate trust automatically vests. You control 15% of the voting shares. You assign that proxy to me. Combined with my allied board members, we force a vote of no confidence on Donovan's European expansion. He loses his majority. I step in as interim CEO." Sienna traced her signature line with a manicured fingernail. "He's going to be furious, Harry. You saw him at the penthouse. He's completely unhinged." "Let him be unhinged," Harrison scoffed, leaning back. "He's a dinosaur, Sienna. His ego blinded him to the reality of the market, and it blinded him to us. He thought he could buy loyalty. He thought he could buy an heir. He's about to learn that everything has a price, and his is early retirement." Sienna picked up the pen. She positioned the golden nib over the thick paper. The heavy oak doors of the conference room did not just open. They were violently shoved apart. They hit the magnetic stoppers with a sound like a gunshot. Sienna gasped, dropping the pen. Harrison shot to his feet, his chair screeching against the hardwood floor. Donovan Reed stood in the doorway. He was not wearing his usual impeccably tailored suit. He wore a dark overcoat, his collar turned up against the spring chill, his eyes sunken and feral. Flanking him were two massive private security contractors, and behind them stood Gregory Brooks, Donovan's lead litigator, a man known in corporate circles as the Undertaker. Finally, Desmond Pierce, the private investigator, slipped into the room, quietly closing the doors behind him. "Donovan," Harrison said, his voice cracking just a fraction before he forced it back into a mask of professional outrage. "What is the meaning of this? This is a private legal consultation." "Sit down, Harrison," Donovan said. His voice wasn't a yell. It was a terrifying, deadened rasp. It was the voice of a man who had nothing left to lose. Harrison didn't move. "I will not be intimidated. Sienna has a right to legal counsel, and as the CFO of your company, I am well within my rights to—" "I said, sit down," Donovan roared, slamming his fist onto the mahogany table with such force that the crystal water pitchers rattled. Harrison slowly sank back into his chair, his eyes darting toward the frosted glass walls, looking for an exit. Sienna had pressed herself as far back into the leather upholstery as she could, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Donovan walked slowly around the table, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He stopped right behind Harrison's chair, leaning down until his mouth was inches from his protégé's ear. "You thought I was a dinosaur," Donovan whispered. "You thought my ego made me stupid. But you forgot one crucial detail, Harry. I built the damn meteor." Donovan straightened up and snapped his fingers. Gregory Brooks stepped forward, dropping a thick, black binder onto the table, directly on top of the proxy documents Sienna was about to sign. "Let's review the severance package," Gregory said, his voice crisp and entirely devoid of emotion. "Mr. Cole, as of 8 a.m. this morning, you have been terminated for cause from Reed Global Logistics. Your corporate accounts have been frozen. Your company car has been repossessed from the garage downstairs. Furthermore, Vanguard Intel has uncovered 3 separate instances of you transferring company funds through offshore shell corporations to artificially inflate quarterly earnings." Harrison's face went completely bloodless. That's a lie. You can't prove that. It's a fabrication." "The SEC disagrees," Gregory continued smoothly. "We delivered the complete forensic accounting file to the Securities and Exchange Commission, 2 hours ago. They are currently executing a warrant at your townhouse. You aren't just fired, Harrison. You are going to federal prison for a very, very long time." Harrison opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. The brilliant, ruthless CFO, the man who was going to steal a multi-billion-dollar empire, was reduced to a gasping, terrified shell. He looked at Sienna, but she was staring at the black binder in horror, realizing that the lifeboat she thought she had boarded was actually a submarine with no doors, rapidly sinking to the bottom of the ocean. Donovan turned his attention to his wife. "And now for the mother of my child," Donovan said, the word child dripping with venom. "Donnie, please," Sienna begged, tears streaming down her face, entirely ruining her makeup. "He manipulated me. Harrison threatened me. He said if I didn't help him, he would tell the press I was a fraud. I was scared, Donnie. I did it for us. I did it to protect our family." Donovan let out a harsh, barking laugh that held absolutely no humor. "Protect our family? Do you honestly think I don't know who the father is?" Sienna froze. The tears stopped. "Did you really believe?" Donovan said, leaning over the table, his face inches from hers, "that I wouldn't test the DNA the second that child is born? Did you think I would let a parasite inherit my life's work? I know it's Harrison's. I know you've been sleeping with him in Soho for a year." Sienna looked down at her lap, the fight completely draining out of her. The masquerade was over. Gregory Brooks stepped forward again, sliding a single sheet of paper toward Sienna. "Mrs. Reed, Paragraph 4, Section B of your prenuptial agreement strictly defines the terms of infidelity and material fraud. Presenting another man's child as Mr. Reed's biological heir to secure a financial payout constitutes egregious fraud. As of this moment, your prenup is voided. You will receive nothing. No alimony, no real estate, no settlement. The secondary property in New Jersey is currently being packed up. You have until midnight to collect your personal belongings, at which point the locks will be changed." "You can't do this," Sienna whispered, her voice hollow. "I'm pregnant. The press, the public will destroy you. They'll ruin your company." Donovan stood up straight, buttoning his overcoat. He looked at the two people who had conspired to strip him of his dignity and his empire. He felt a dark, twisted sense of satisfaction, but beneath it, a profound, gnawing emptiness. "The company is already bleeding, Sienna. The board is calling for my resignation. My stock is in freefall. You two managed to burn my legacy to the ground." Donovan's voice dropped to a terrifying, deadly calm. "But I am Donovan Reed. I will survive the ashes. You two will be buried underneath them." He turned and walked toward the door. Without looking back, he issued his final command to the security team. "Escort them out of the building. Take their phones. Throw them on the street." 6 months later, the air in New York had turned warm, and the cherry blossoms in Central Park were in full, defiant bloom. Inside the grand hall of the Metropolitan Fine Arts Museum, the atmosphere was electric. This was not the chaotic, predatory energy of the Pierre Hotel. This was an evening of genuine reverence. The room was filled with historians, global art collectors, and the quiet, powerful elite who dealt in culture rather than corporate raiding. At the center of the hall, concealed beneath a massive 2-story velvet drape, stood the Medici fresco. Claire Hastings stood off to the side, holding a glass of sparkling water. She wore an emerald green silk gown that cascaded effortlessly to the floor, her hair falling in soft, natural waves over her shoulders. She looked luminous. The tension that had lived in her jaw for 5 years was entirely gone, replaced by the quiet, unshakable confidence of a woman who had mastered her craft and reclaimed her soul. Her sister Audrey bumped her shoulder gently. Nervous? Not at all, Claire smiled, taking a sip of her water. The work speaks for itself. It does, Beatrice Montgomery said, appearing beside them like a benevolent ghost in a silver sequined pantsuit. Beatrice squeezed Claire's arm. You bled for that plaster, Claire. You breathed life back into 500 years of history. Tonight is your coronation. Beatrice walked to the podium at the front of the room. The elegant crowd fell silent. Ladies and gentlemen, Beatrice's voice echoed through the marble hall. For decades, the world thought the Medici courtyard fresco was lost to the ravages of time and water. We believed a masterpiece had been silenced. But art, much like the human spirit, has an extraordinary capacity for resurrection, if it is placed in the right hands. Beatrice gestured toward Claire. The spotlight shifted, bathing Claire in a warm, golden glow. It takes immense courage to look at something broken and believe it can be whole again. It takes meticulous skill to strip away the grime, the false layers, and the damage to reveal the absolute truth beneath. Claire Hastings did not just restore a painting, she rescued a piece of our shared humanity. I give you the Medici fresco. Beatrice signaled the attendants. The massive velvet drapes were pulled away, dropping to the floor with a soft thud. A collective gasp swept through the room, followed immediately by thunderous, deafening applause. The fresco was breathtaking. The colors, vibrant lapis lazuli, deep crimsons, and brilliant golds, shone with a clarity that had not been seen in centuries. The faces of the Renaissance figures seemed to breathe, looking down upon the modern crowd with ancient, timeless wisdom. Claire stepped forward, tears prickling the corners of her eyes, not out of sadness, but out of profound, overwhelming joy. She bowed slightly, acknowledging the applause, her heart full. This was her legacy. Not a child she was forced to bear for a billionaire's ego, but a testament to beauty, resilience, and survival. Later that evening, as the gala wound down and guests began to filter out into the warm spring night, Claire stepped out onto the museum's terrace to catch her breath. The city lights of Manhattan stretched out before her, a sea of glittering diamonds against the dark sky. She opened her small clutch to check her phone. As she swiped past her notifications, an alert from a financial news app caught her eye. She usually ignored them, but the headline was impossible to miss. Donovan Reed ousted. Board of Directors forces resignation. Following months of erratic behavior and stock plunge, Vanguard Group initiates hostile takeover. Below the headline was a photograph of Donovan. He was walking out of a courthouse, swarmed by paparazzi. He looked 10 years older. The arrogance was gone, the sharp edges of his tailored suit seeming to hang off a frame that had hollowed out. He was alone. Sienna had vanished into obscurity after the annulment, and Harrison was awaiting trial in a federal holding facility. Donovan had kept his money, but he had lost his empire, his reputation, and his manufactured heir. He was a king ruling over an empty, desolate island. Claire stared at the photograph for a long moment. She searched herself for anger, for pity, or for the bitter satisfaction of revenge. She found nothing. The man in the photograph was a stranger. The life she had lived with him felt like a faded, poorly painted replica of a life, entirely stripped of its false varnish. Claire locked her phone and slipped it back into her bag. She turned her back on the skyline, the glittering lights of the corporate world, and walked back inside the museum. She walked back toward the music, the warmth, and the masterpiece she had brought back to life, leaving the ghosts of the past exactly where they belonged. The saga of Claire Hastings and Donovan Reed is a profound exploration of what it truly means to build a legacy. Donovan treated life as a transactional balance sheet, believing that loyalty, family, and heirs could be bought, bullied, or engineered. His ruthless pursuit of a bloodline ultimately blinded him to the deceit festering within his own inner circle, leading to the collapse of the very empire he sought to protect. In stark contrast, Claire's journey illustrates that true resilience cannot be measured by wealth or societal status. Stripped of her dignity and discarded, she did not seek to destroy her enemies with malice. Rather, she used the sharp blade of the truth to set herself free. By pouring her soul into the meticulous restoration of forgotten art, Claire forged an enduring legacy of beauty and strength, proving that our greatest triumphs come from rebuilding ourselves.